So the world is waking up to a series of massive explosions that are currently lighting up the Russian skyline. And for Vladimir Putin, the nightmare is no longer just at the front lines. It is deep inside his own backyard. We are witnessing a relentless strategic campaign that is quite literally setting the Kremlin's future on fire. Ukraine has shifted from a defensive posture into a full-scale offensive strike against the arteries of the Russian war machine, the refineries and export terminals that fuel Putin's aggression. This isn't just about property damage, it's about a total hardware and economic meltdown. Reports are flooding in of drone swarms penetrating layered air defenses to strike the very heart of Russia's energy sector. These facilities, once thought to be untouchable, are now being reduced to twisted metal and ash. By hitting these export terminals, Ukraine is doing more than just cutting off fuel for tanks. They are choking the financial lifeblood that Putin uses to bypass Western sanctions. This is a vivid demonstration of how Russia is far from invincible. For years, Putin bragged about an undefeatable military and an economy that could withstand any pressure. But you cannot hide the truth when your major refineries are burning for the entire world to see. The illusion of Russian safety is vaporizing. These strikes serve as proof that Ukraine's capabilities are becoming far stronger than anyone anticipated, forcing Russia to divert its limited air defense resources away from the front lines, just to protect its own industrial gut. Moscow is now in a state of panic. To replace the lost production, Putin is being forced into even more desperate measures. We've already seen him butchering his own army, stripping guns and parts from Cold War-era tanks just to keep his units barely functional. Now he is facing a scenario where he might have the tanks, but no fuel to run them and no money to repair them. This is where the warrior mindset of real leadership comes into play. While the previous era of diplomatic caution allowed Putin to test limits and exploit loopholes, the return of peace through strength is shifting the entire geopolitical landscape. President Trump has made it clear that continued support for Ukraine is a strategic investment to bring Russia to the negotiating table from a position of absolute weakness. If the Kremlin cannot protect its own refineries, it cannot sustain a long-term war. The hardware meltdown is real, the Scrapyard Superpower is running out of options, and for the first time since the invasion began, Ukraine has the upper hand. The question is no longer if Russia will face a total collapse, but how many more refineries have to burn before Putin realizes his time is up. The smoke rising from the Lukoil and Rosneft refineries isn't just a signal of physical destruction, it is the smoke of a collapsing economy. While the Kremlin tries to project an image of stability, the hard numbers coming out of the Russian energy sector reveal a meltdown that even their most creative accountants can no longer hide. Reports from industry insiders and insurance giants like Mainz confirm that Russian oil companies have suffered a staggering 1 trillion rubles in losses, that is over $13 billion, vaporized by Ukrainian precision. This is the ultimate humiliation for a regime that calls itself an energy superpower. For decades, Russia used its oil and gas as a weapon to bully Europe and finance its military expansion. Today, that weapon has been turned back on the Kremlin. Ukraine is systematically targeting the heart of the industry, the atmospheric and vacuum distillation units. These are the critical nodes without which a refinery becomes nothing more than a pile of useless pipe. We are seeing a consistent pattern of high-precision strikes hitting the very facilities that fuel the Russian war machine. In just the last few weeks, the Volgograd refinery, one of the largest in the country with a capacity of 13 million metric tons, was forced to halt gasoline production after a devastating drone attack. Just 24 hours later, the Ukhta refinery, located a shocking 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, was ignited. This proves that no corner of Russia is safe. Whether you're in the Krasnodar region or deep in the Republic of Komi, the arteries of the state are vulnerable. The hardware meltdown we've been tracking in the tank divisions is now being mirrored in the industrial sector. Because of Western sanctions, Russia cannot simply buy the parts needed to repair these sophisticated refineries. They are now facing a reality where they must butcher their own industrial infrastructure, cannibalizing equipment from secondary plants just to keep their primary export hubs operational. This isn't just a setback, it's a systemic rot that is choking the economy from the inside out. And the Consequences are hitting the Russian people where it hurts most, at the pump. Wholesale gasoline prices in Russia have just seen their sharpest weekly increase in over 6 months. Prices for AI-95 gasoline have surged to record highs, forcing the Kremlin to reimpose export bans to prevent a total domestic fuel crisis. Putin promised his people a quick victory. Instead, he has delivered a future of long lines at petrol stations and a currency that is losing its value by the day. This is exactly why the peace-through-strength approach is so effective. When you confront a bully with the physical reality of their own weakness, the illusion of power shatters. President Trump has correctly identified that the path to ending this conflict is by ratcheting up the pressure until the Kremlin has no choice but to come to the table. While the previous administration's hesitation allowed Putin to survive, the current momentum shows that the Scrapyard Superpower is running out of time, money and fuel. The factories are burning, the prices are soaring, and the truth is finally catching up with the Kremlin. While the refineries burn, the geopolitical stakes have reached a boiling point that the world hasn't seen in decades. This isn't just about Ukraine anymore, it is about a direct high-speed collision course between NATO and the Kremlin. As Russia's internal arteries bleed out, Putin is attempting to lash out, testing the boundaries of the Western world in a desperate bid to reclaim the initiative. But he is finding that the days of strategic ambiguity are over. We are seeing a massive shift in how the world responds to Russian aggression. In a closed-door meeting in Moscow that should have sent chills down the spine of every Kremlin official, diplomats from Britain, France and Germany delivered a final, lethal force ultimatum. They made it clear, if Russian jets or drones continue to violate NATO airspace, as we saw with the 12-minute supersonic incursion over Estonia, the response will no longer be a warning. The response will be an immediate shoot-down. This is the return of the warrior mindset on the global stage. It is the realization that you cannot negotiate with a dictator who views restraint as weakness. President Trump has consistently advocated for this exact brand of peace through strength. He understands that the only way to prevent a wider war is to show such overwhelming resolve that the enemy wouldn't dare pull the trigger. We are seeing that strength now being mirrored by the alliance, as they realize that Putin's provocations are a sign of his internal panic, not his external power. The Kremlin is trapped in a pincer movement. On one side, Ukraine is systematically igniting their military-industrial base, hitting factories in places like Karachev that produce the very components needed for Russian air defenses. On the other side, NATO is reinforcing the shield, moving advanced interceptors and radar systems to the Baltic front. Putin wanted to divide the West. Instead, his actions have forged a level of unity that has left the Scrapyard Superpower isolated and exposed. Russia is now facing a hardware crisis that is reaching the level of a total meltdown. They are being forced to divert their best S-400 air defense units away from the Ukrainian front to protect their burning refineries and their own borders. This creates a choking effect on the battlefield. Without air cover, the Russian army is being butchered in the trenches, forced to rely on scrap metal and 1950s technology while facing 21st century precision. This is the beginning of the endgame. The more Putin tries to test NATO, the more he reveals his own desperation. He knows that his time is running out, his resources are depleted, and the arteries of his power are being severed one by one. The world is watching the slow-motion collapse of an empire that built its reputation on fear, only to realize that the fear has finally shifted to the other side. While the refineries are ignited and the arteries of the state bleed out, the most humiliating aspect of Putin's failed conquest is happening on the front lines. We are witnessing what analysts are calling a total hardware meltdown. The so-called second most powerful military in the world has been reduced to a scrapyard superpower, and the evidence is impossible to hide. The Kremlin is now quite literally butchering its own army just to survive another week of combat. Reports and leaked logistics documents have confirmed a trend that exposes the total desperation of the Russian military. They are stripping the main guns, turrets, and critical internal systems off of their own storage tanks to patch up what little they have left on the battlefield. We aren't talking about modernization, we are talking about a scrapyard operation. Entire storage depots filled with Cold War-era armor, T-55s and T-62s from the 1950s and 60s are being torn apart. Their main cannons are being removed and shipped to frontline units as crude replacements for destroyed modern weaponry. Imagine the morale of a Russian soldier when he is sent into a Franken tank, a vehicle held together by mismatched parts, missing the advanced optics and microchips that a modern war requires. Because of the crippling sanctions, Putin can no longer produce the high-tech components his military needs. The microchips from the West have dried up, and the alternatives from the East are failing at every turn. This isn't just a shortage, it's a systemic rot that is choking the Russian war machine from the inside out. This is where the contrast in leadership becomes undeniable. While the previous era of weakness allowed this rot to grow, the return of the warrior mindset and the peace through strength doctrine is exposing the truth. President Trump has correctly identified that a bully only survives as long as their bluff isn't called. By empowering Ukraine to strike the industrial hubs that produce these parts, and by holding a firm line on sanctions, the world is finally seeing the scrapyard superpower for what it truly is, a regime running on fumes and rusted metal. The hardware meltdown is a physical manifestation of a failed legacy. Putin thought he could trade quantity for quality, but in the 21st century, 1,000 rusted T-62s are no match for a handful of high-precision strikes. The arteries are burning, the arsenal is being butchered, and the Kremlin is panicking because they know that once the spare parts run out, the game is over.